One night I had a dream. I dreamed I was walking along the beach with the Lord, and across the sky flashed scenes from my life. For each scene, I noticed two sets of footprints in the sand. One belonged to me and the other to the Lord. When the last scene of my life flashed before us, I looked back at the footprints in the sand. I noticed that many times along the path of my life, there was only one set of footprints. I also noticed that it happened at the very lowest and saddest times in my life. This really bothered me, and I questioned the Lord about it. Lord, you said that once I decided to follow you, you would walk with me all the way. But I have noticed that during the most troublesome times in my life, there's only one set of footprints. I don't understand why, in times when I needed you the most, you should leave me. The Lord replied, "My precious, precious child, I love you, and I would never, never leave you during your times of trial and suffering. When you saw only one set of footprints, it was then that I carried you." That's from the Footprints prayer. Welcome. Thank you for joining. It is me, it is I, Russ Rapp, and we're going to be talking about non-duality. It's the main focus of my YouTube channel. If you're new to the subject, I have other videos that you can look at. Maybe explains it more succinctly what we're talking about when it comes to non-duality. I ask that you would subscribe to my channel. My goal at this point is to get enough subscribers that I can take the show on the road and record these live talks using my iPhone. Yes, I have an iPhone, not an Android. So in today's discussion, we're going to be talking about forgiveness. So non-duality, function of forgiveness. So what is non-duality? The most basic definition is not two, because the word non means not and duality means two. So not two. What that implies is that we are intimately connected. It implies a oneness, that that separation is an illusion. There's many different ways that you can try to describe what it's pointing to, but it's in the word itself, in the phrase non-duality, it's bringing up the idea of duality, that which we already believe in, that is what we think is real. We see the world, the 3D reality, the material world through the lens of time, through changing appearances, through a past, a present, and a future. We see each other as me versus you, self versus other, and all sorts of duality that we frame the world around us. And so non-duality is pointing to the duality that we already believe and saying no, not duality. And the paradox of non-duality is we can point to the duality and say that it's not real, but we function and think in terms of duality, and therefore we can never really know the outside of duality, what is not to. That's the premise of non-duality in a sense. However, everyone has another way or different ways of discussing the topic. In a sense, when we talk about the idea of non-duality, it's a concept. And it's a way that we communicate through language. And so as limited as it can be, that's how we try to express an idea of non-duality. And yet it's an idea that can't really fully be expressed. So instead of saying oneness, we say not two, because oneness becomes a thing to achieve and obtain, whereas non-duality serves the function of negation, of pointing to our assumptions, our beliefs, our idols, and saying that, hey, maybe you're believing something that's untrue. You are living in a matrix, Neo. So we all have that splinter in our mind, the sense that something isn't quite right. We understand the flaw of human nature, the original sin, the fall from grace. Whether you have a background in Christianity or any religion or not, there is a sense of the original sin, the sense of that we believe in separation and the cause of all the strife, struggle, and violence in the world through that belief of separation. And so, no matter how you try to contextualize it or to frame the conversation of this idea of sin, uh, it's pointing to the same thing in different ways. Even from a non-religious standpoint, you can see the imperfection of humanity, the fact that we make mistakes, that we are imperfect, that we struggle to be our true and full developed selves. And you look around, it's kind of an obvious statement. So welcome. If you feel free to add your comments or questions in the chat, I will get to them hopefully at some point. I appreciate the back and forth, so please add that to your to-do list, or not to do. That is the question. I did want to read, in listening to the sermon from Eagle Brook Church today, they were talking about Romans, and there was a verse in there that I thought was very non-dual that I thought I would bring up, because I like seeing non-dual related themes in the Bible. And it is Romans chapter 2, verse 1. You therefore have no excuse, you who pass judgment on someone else. For at whatever point you judge the other, you are condemning yourself, because you who pass judgment do the same things. And so when you are judging others, you're essentially non-dualistically judging yourself. You can't have one without the other. It's like love and marriage. And so that's kind of the basic theme of the focus of today's discussion, this moment, whether you're watching this live or watching this after the fact. Non-duality can get confusing because there's different ways to describe it, whether it being something to achieve or a state of being or a state of enlightenment or something that you can become. And then there's the flip side to that, is speaking of non-duality in a more descriptive way, of a way to describe an aspect of reality or the nature of what is. So with that being said, sometimes there is a debate in non-duality of whether it's something that you can work on or become, or if it's an experience that you can obtain or achieve. And the question is that something that can be maintained over a time? What that means, what that looks like, who has it, who doesn't have it. And that's where a lot of the message of non-duality gets lost, because it becomes yet another way to personally or spiritually develop, becomes something that you can do to get rid of your ego or let the false self fall away, or become your true self or your authentic self. And it becomes something that you are continually working at because of the apparent flaw in your nature of being a human being, the imperfection within the perfection. So that's where a lot of the confusion lies. That's where we speak of this in different ways. And the reason that we talk about the experience of non-duality, or some sort of level of consciousness or awareness or depth, is because that's how we relate to life. That's how we see the world. We see it dualistically. And so it becomes something that is um, a natural outpouring of the seeking energy of trying to understand or contemplate or have some sort of epiphany that is everlasting within your life. So it's something that the focus becomes something that you want to be. We have SF joining us. What up, Russ? Peace. Well, thank you for joining, SF. So the flip side to trying to define what it means or how to be or who is non-duality, if someone's achieved some pinnacle of reality, the flip side to that is seeing that it is the way of the world, it is the way of the not world, it is how life presents itself, it is the absolute eternal. Through the change, nothing changes. Through the falling away and appearances of objects in the material world, there is this absolute empty fullness that underlies all of it. So that's the thing that is being described when talking about non-duality, but that's something that we can't really fully grasp intellectually or conceptually. So we fall back to the habit of thinking of it as an experience. And I think there's a few comments that I'll probably end up reading from recently that maybe will help shed some light on this. But I think ultimately, the focus of considering non-duality and experience, or something that you can have, or something that uh, a guru or some spiritual teacher leader has obtained, uh, it's because it's something that you don't see in yourself. And I guess it's easy to see the um, logical fallacy of it when you consider your own personal perception of non-duality, because there's some belief that there's a requirement that you have to think or act in a certain way, or you have to believe something, or you have to believe in oneness. But then when that doesn't happen, when it doesn't appear that way, when you're acting outside of your judgments of what you should be acting, and your super ego gets kicked into full gear, then there's this disconnection between you and the oneness that you were trying to seek. It becomes you outside of believing in Valhalla, believing in um, heaven on earth, essentially, because you fail at that belief. And so the desire, or what people are seeking oftentimes when they come to this topic, or when we talk about enlightened, they seek the enlightened person, whether current or historic. um, they seek the one that they want to follow in order to achieve the same level of enlightenment, essentially. um, but the answer of enlightenment, the ultimate truth of enlightenment, is shown in that seeking, and it's in and of itself. Because if you are projecting onto other another person some perfection that you don't see in yourself, then in that moment, that projection is pointing to the fact that it has nothing, non-duality or enlightenment has nothing to do with you or your belief. Because if you were to believe that someone else has achieved that pinnacle of success and you do not, then it becomes something that is something that you don't have that they have. And what that means is there is no truth to that statement of enlightenment. It does not include all. It's not about oneness or not two-ness. It's something that one has that makes them special outside of you being special. And so there's a separation there. So the attempt to find enlightenment through seeing another as being above it all negates the whole idea of enlightenment in that sense, because by the fact of your doubt proves that what you're believing about enlightenment is not true. To me, that totally makes sense in the way I'm describing it, but it was kind of a word salad, so I don't know if that makes sense to you, but what's another way I can put it? I think the idea. Okay, here's another way. So I don't feel like it's a requirement for me to believe in non duality or to see it as true in every moment or live in a certain way in accordance to it, um, to make the truth of non duality real, essentially. And so if I were to admit that I don't in times believe non duality or think it's, like one of the comments that I'll probably read, it's calling it BS. That is irregardless of the truth of non-duality. And it's the same with you. If you think whatever guru you want to put up there as far as having it figured out or being enlightened, in the fact that you believe that they are enlightened and you aren't, that right there takes away the truth of the enlightenment. That's being repetitive. See, this is all coming out intellectually, talking about things that sort of can be talked about logically, but um, not really. So I think the key is looking and questioning at your beliefs, and that's where the confusion lies. Is your misperception of what non-duality is trying to teach, I guess. And ultimately, it's not necessarily trying to teach anything. I think from a materialistic 3D world, normal way of seeing things, if you want to put normal in quotes, the only function of non-duality is forgiveness. And how I say that is, it's kind of this idea of sin, whether you see sin in the same way as Christianity teaches, or if you see it defined in a different way. Because even within A Course in Miracles, they talk a little bit about, or a lot about, forgiveness in the sense that there is no sin. So by claiming or making the statement or the argument that there is no sin implies the flip side of the coin, that there is sin. And yet, forgiveness implies that sin is real. Otherwise, forgiveness wouldn't have a function. And so that's where God's grace comes into play, where we believe ourselves to be sinners, and yet we are still loved regardless of our sin. So to say that there is no sin, it implies the fact that there is sin. And so how do you handle that? How do you deal with that? That's dealt with not through you, but through God, through grace, through forgiveness. Because when you forgive others, there is a function of that in human relations, in interpersonal relationships. However, your forgiveness can be conditional, meaning I forgive you because of this, or I forgive you and therefore the forgiveness can be taken away if all of a sudden I change my mind. And there can be genuine, unconditional forgiveness that's given, but that's given ultimately through something outside of yourself, through God, forgiveness that can't be taken away. And so even through sin, in a sense, sin isn't real, like A Course in Miracles says, because grace is real. So sin isn't real because grace is real, but sin isn't real because grace is real. So there's an absolute to that statement. SF says, what surprises me is how unsatisfactory non-duality can be and how this is absolutely fine. We all set out looking for satisfaction, but we'll never find it. Well, I think, we're looking for something. And we will find things. We will find gratification or satisfaction in certain respects. But it's kind of like the ultimate duality of being alive as a person, as a human being, is that we all meet our maker, we all die. And so there's always the absolute nature of death and change. And so satisfaction is conditional. We can be satisfied and then unsatisfied, but reality stays the same. Mark Smith says, stick to non-duality. Forgiveness and sin and forgiveness for others is all about duality. Mark Smith says, why is grace real? What does that mean? You are looking for something else, but there is nothing else. Nothing needs to happen. There is only this. There is not two. Okay, so I'll read those again, Mark. Stick to non-duality. Forgiveness and sin and forgiveness for others is all about duality. Mark says, why is grace real? What does that mean? You are looking for something else, but there is nothing else. Nothing needs to happen. There is only this. There is only not two. So I can say, Mark, that I 100% agree with that. But what does that mean for you? What does that give you? Maybe it gives you nothing because you think, I don't know what I'm talking about. Does it give you satisfaction or end to seeking to claim that to be true? In a sense, does it even need to be argued? Does it even need to be stated that there is not two, that there is only this? Like, people always ask me oftentimes, why do I talk about non-duality when there's no point, there's no meaning, there's only what is, there's only this, there is not two. What's the point of talking about this? And that's a great question. But is that our experience of life? Because that's what people focus on, is our experience as a separate self. That's where the question lies. That's where the confusion sets in. because the discussion itself, or the questions of reality, the questions of the nature of what is, or these questions about grace or forgiveness, that comes from a sense of me as an individual, because the absolute has no need to ask the questions. And so the communication, the dialogue, implies a separation that may or may not be real. But the fact that I'm talking with Mark Smith through a chat, through a microphone, into a laptop, into whatever device you're using, implies duality. And so that's how we communicate in the absolute. So whether it's me making a statement or a claim, or you making a statement or a claim, it's done in the 3D material world that we experience through time, through a past, present, and a future that seems to exist, the appearance of objects that change throughout a period of time. So the conversation itself is set up through duality. Our thought process is set up through duality. That's how we communicate. It's language. Mark says, there is only life. There is no one to experience it. There is no separation. Mark says, me as an individual in the essence of duality, that is why we suffer. We think something is missing. Something needs to happen. That is wrong. Mark says, sorry, Russ, I do not want to upset your show. I will sign off now. I don't think you're upsetting the show. I think you're bringing up some great points. I guess my question to you, Mark, would be, how do you, it's kind of like the idea of Byron Katie's The Work of, questioning your thoughts through that like the 4 questions process of, you make a statement and then you question, is it real or is it true? And can I be absolutely sure that it's true? That's the second question. And then how do I feel when I believe this statement? And then the fourth question is, who would I be without this thought or this belief? And so there's no requirement that you believe that in the words that you state in the chat, as far as um, defining why we suffer, or claiming that there is only life, or there is no one to experience it. There is no separation. Essentially, not to downplay what you and I are doing here, but they're just words. And so how does it make you feel, or how does your life affected through this belief in what you're saying? And ultimately, it doesn't change anything. And through that, saying that, it's just more words making claims that, trying to cash a check you can't back up, or bouncing a check. What's that saying? That's what I like about talking about non-duality as a concept, is it doesn't really matter. Like, you can be wrong about a lot of things. You can have your facts wrong. You can be biased in your beliefs or your opinions. They may not be closer to the observable reality, and that can be argued and claimed and disputed. But non-duality isn't something that can be disputed, even though we attempt to. So it's not really anything to do with the claims that we make, because the flip side of making an absolute statement like there is no one to experience it is that there is someone to experience it. And the one I would say for me is experiencing is a guy called Russ Rapp, that I'm speaking of myself in third person. And it's just like when you want to claim, or someone wants to claim that there is no absolute, there is only relative. Like, it's all relative. The only thing that's true is relative, because that's reality. That's the space-time continuum. It's all, time is relative to where you are in relation to others. Space is relative, obviously, through space. where your position is in relation to someone else, and then through time that changes. So time is the changing factor in that. But by saying that all is relative, the paradox in that statement is that it is an absolute statement. And so everything appears to change, and that never stops. Like if you try to stop reality and stop things from moving, good luck for that. Good luck. Good luck in that endeavor, because it's a failed exercise, if you will. And so the obvious way to rectify that is to say that, the ultimate truth is that everything always changes, and that's kind of our experience. But it always changes for someone. It's always identified as one of the objects in that dream of change, if you will, in that recipe of change. You're one of the ingredients. It's always from a perspective. Martin Peniak says, yeah, the question is if all these statements you guys make are actually your own experience. Most Neo-Advaita youngsters believe they are enlightenment. They are enlightenment where it couldn't be further from the truth. uh, don't tell them that. Yeah, so no, I think that's a notable comment. Um, I don't know the definition of neo-Advaita versus non-duality, or I just see it as I see it and say it how I say it. Um, Obviously, based on some experience and research and information and ways that other people have described it. Um, yeah, I think I would say, I guess, ultimately, um, if it's something that you're holding on to, that you're attached to as a belief, as far as claiming that you are enlightenment or there is no person, um, there will be an inherent correction built into the belief. So anytime there is something that appears, uh, the key to unlock that appearance, that belief, that bias is built into the belief itself. So there's always another way. There's always another key. And so when you believe something, it's built in. The freedom is built into the appearance. And what I mean by that more specifically, if you are a neo Advaita youngster, like you're describing it, and you think that, oh, everything's great, and I'm just gonna munch on my oatmeal and drink my tea and all this stuff, life's gonna get in the way of that. Your dog's gonna get hit by a car. You're gonna lose your job. Your significant other is gonna leave you. Whatever negative things come up that disrupt your feeling of oneness or your belief about the goodness of life always gets called into question. And then the opinion of yourself as a sinner, whether you describe it that way or not, will always come into the effect of feelings of guilt or shame or anger or anxiety or fear. All of that comes and makes its appearance in the uh, the screen of life that we see ourselves on, and will call into question your own personal BS. So I guess you don't really have to worry if if your belief is further from truth, because the truth is going to be there regardless of whether you believe it or not, and it'll show up, or it won't show up and you'll die, but it will show up one way or the other. If it doesn't show up in your lifetime, then the ultimate truth bringer of death in the belief of life will come and turn you into dust, essentially. And it's kind of um, like in the Bible, Juan 8:32. So John 8:32. Y conocerán la verdad, y la verdad los hará libres. And that's loosely translated to um, and they shall know the truth, and the truth will make them free. So that's an absolute statement. The truth will be revealed. Nothing can stop what is coming. There's another Bible verse I'm going to pull up. Let me think if I can remember which one it is. We'll find it if you bear with me and be patient for a moment. It is Luke 8:17. For nothing is secret that shall not be made manifest, neither anything hid that shall not be known and come abroad. Luke 8:17. So if you feel like when you hear either myself or others speaking about non-duality and making claims of there is no person or there is no sin, or there is only this or there is only that, or what is the only reality. Um, if there's a feeling that you have to somehow now take that on or believe that statement, then you're kind of missing the fact that, as Paul Hederman has said in the past, this message isn't for you. There's nothing to receive. You're not receiving this message. And yet, through this conversation, there are things that you can attach to that may serve as keys to unlock that which is being attached to, that which can set you free, the lies, the Maya, the illusion that you saddle your horse to can be unhooked and set free. So there is that. There is the appearance of letting go, of falling away. But that inherent grace, that inherent forgiveness is built into the reality. And that's where in the Bible, when the Bible talks about Jesus Christ, Jesus is referred to as a perfect individual, a perfect human being. And so through that mythos, if you will, of perfection of a person, then there's a understanding of the nature of the crucifixion. Because through the crucifixion, through the death of Christ, through the blood that was shed, that's where everlasting life is found. So that's where, when the Bible says, you can only reach God through me, that's kind of what that's pointing to. Because there was a persecution of a perfect individual that walked on the earth. And so through that, there is no fault of Jesus. It gives us a way to understand forgiveness and to understand grace, because if Jesus was seen as flawed, then the persecution would seem somewhat justified. But when it's wholly and completely unjustified, then the forgiveness of the sins of humanity is shown in a way that it is intended, I think. That's my interpretation. But what do I know? On my tea bag tag, Good Earth says, and this is a quote from Unknown: aspire to inspire before you expire. And I guess that's what, for me, I like doing these live talks, because it's something where I can pop on here and start talking, and hopefully you can connect with some of the stuff that I say, that you get some value out of it. But I think when people come to this subject, or any subject really, in a lot of ways, especially in like the self-help genre or spiritual development or any of that, there's this need to and I can understand it, to speed up the process, to try to find uh, the main nugget of wisdom, the thing that you're going to get out of it, um, to simplify the process, to make it as easy as you can to find what you're looking for, to find that what you're seeking. And yet, oftentimes, the real value that you get out of any practice, whether it's meditation or some sort of nutritional practice or exercise or prayer or, um, you know, reading books, any sort of things that you see as being something that can help your life situation. If you do it in a superficial sense and you just skim the surface of it, you don't really get that much out of it. And that's why I think when people, especially when people who aren't necessarily interested in non-duality, you say, okay, well, what is non-duality? Well, it means not two. It's talks about the illusion of separation, kind of like oneness. Oh, okay. Well, I'm gonna go do this now. Talk to you later. Because it doesn't connect there. There's really nothing that people get out of it from the simple definition of non-duality. But if it's presented in a way that's like, you're gonna have the greatest life and all the things are gonna change, you're gonna be able to manifest your perfect reality and it's gonna be great, then people understand that and relate to that, even though some people can be turned off if it seems like a sales pitch. But the 5 steps to being a true authentic person, or to just discover your inner self, or to let go of your ego, whatever the claim or the thing that you're trying to um, sell, essentially, to get people to listen to what you're saying or to try to help them in a more positive way. That's what people connect with. And so when there's no real um, desire to change people, or the message itself is just kind of like, this is it, then people are like, well, what, this is it? You're just going to say what is, or, you know, this is life. There's no one to experience this. It's just this, what does that even mean? They don't connect to it because it doesn't mean anything to them. Why does this guy take so many sips of tea? And it's kind of like what I've experienced with the Enneagram, which I've talked about in other live talks. And so, my, to back up, to be a little bit even more meta, um, most people, I would assume, unless you're watching this live, if they watch this after the fact, which there's not a lot of people that do, they'll watch for the first minute or two and then say, I get nothing out of this, or I don't get the point, or I'm busy, or I'm going to go to the next video. Maybe this other person has something better to say, or I don't have the time to sit here and listen to this guy babble about stuff. But maybe so we're 45 minutes into this conversation. Maybe as I bring up the Enneagram, that's something that people connect with, but they didn't give it the time. And I in a lot of ways I don't blame you, but they don't give the time to let the full conversation develop and find those pieces within, the needle in the haystack, the diamond in the rough, if you will. Those pieces that you need to hear, that you don't want to hear because you're not ready to put in the work, if you will. And like with the Enneagram, that was something I was really passionate about. I think if I would have had a YouTube account back in the day, I would have probably had an Enneagram channel versus non-duality, but um, that's how life happens. But my experience is, most people I would say, hey, Enneagram, go, take this test or learn about this, figure out what your type is, and maybe they'd figure out their type because it's a 9 point personality system, essentially. And they'd be like, oh, I'm a type 6, or I'm a type 9, I think, or maybe I think I'm a type 8, or whatever out of the 9. And then that would be it. And they'd feel good about themselves, or maybe they felt like they learned something about their personality, or maybe a few tricks they can do, or that sort of thing, as far as being able to function better in life. But um, outside of that, there really was no in-depth look into their life. And so that's where a lot of times when people talk about non-duality, they want that depth. And so when you're talking about this is it, and there's nothing you can experience, and it's like, well, there's got to be more to that. And so I understand the need to want to dig further, but I think the epiphany of enlightenment, or the truth of non-duality, is that it's always been like this. It's not something you can have or obtain or become. It's always been this way. No one else has something that you don't have in regards to that. That's the message. So let's say someone has a peak experience and the sense of self falls away. Um, and MMM says, please talk about practicality about how to experience non-duality. So I'm kind of getting to that. So just be a little patient. Um, but there's this idea of um, like obtaining some state of reality, of reaching some pinnacle of existence or experience, where now all of a sudden you are now enlightened and all is well in the world. And part of the reason why I'm hesitating here is because I kind of lost my train of thought and what I was talking about, but I'll just keep moving forward as life does. But I think sometimes when it's seen as, what does it mean to believe non-duality, or be non-dual, or have some sense of non-dual awareness, um, that can appear in any different kind of way. But I think sometimes there's a sense that you almost have to have a lack of affect, or, what's the difference between a personality disorder and people that claim to know non-duality? So if I, had this look where I was seemed super relaxed. And like, I don't have a care in the world, and because there is no person, it's just beliefs that people have that I no longer do. And everything is just super chill. And it's like, I just, you know, took a big bong hit. And that's what non duality is. Because, it's all just this, it's just what is, you know. So then people can see that and say, "Oh, that person must be evolved. They must have gone to the next level. They went to the they're now clear. Like Scientology." And that's just an appearance of someone acting in a certain way, whether it's genuine or not. I guess doesn't really matter. But um, it's kind of like there's this sense of posing. But do I know if people are posing in the videos that I see, if they're just putting on a show and that's that, or if they're actually like that's their personality and it just comes across a certain way? I don't know. But that has nothing ultimately to do with non-duality because it has nothing to do with you specifically. So MMM, please talk about practicality about how to experience the non-duality. Okay, that's where I was getting at before. So thanks for asking the question. You were both a way that distracted me from what I was saying and a way to bring me back to what I was saying. So congratulations. So if you have this peak experience or this epiphany or this enlightenment, um, I would say, and this is just one person's opinion, that the experience of that is a recognition that it was like this and has always been like this. Like this, the peak experience of non-duality, if people describe it in different ways, of the self falls away, and whether that's forever or for like a short period of time, the sense of it is, from my experience, I would say that it's more of the idea that um, it's always been this way. And so by making that statement or claiming that there is no change, it's an absolute thing of non-duality, then it means that whether you believe it or not is irrelevant. Because if the peak, the pinnacle, the thing that is trying to be achieved in a sense of experiencing non-duality, if that experience is indeed the experience of this is the way it is and it's always been this way, then the importance of that epiphany or that um, enlightenment experience is brought down into the mundane. So it's almost like in levels of development, in a scale, or like Maslow's hierarchy. Let's say your basic human needs of food, water, and shelter, all the way up to self-actualization. In a sense of developing or growing, if you start at the bottom and you try to reach the top, the pinnacle of the mountain, the peak of the mountain, if you will. The peak of non duality is an understanding that the base of non duality is no different. That when you reach the top, you see the summit and you look out onto the vast wilderness below, you realize that it's always been that way. There is no difference in the levels, you know. So it's, you talk about levels of development, non duality is included within all of that. And so whether or not you believe it, or there's no need to reach the top because the experience of the base of the mountain is the same even though the appearance is different. So when you talk when you talk about practicality, and experiencing the non-duality, it's kind of like um, we're kind of in a sense saying two different things. I guess for you, the practicality of it is the the function of forgiveness, the grace that you're able to become free of that which you are seeing as holding you back, or that you're attached to, or the pain and suffering that you are holding on to. And so it allows for that. And so, how do you get to release from that, or how do you grow as a human being? There's all sorts of ways that you can go about that. And they're called different things. And some may work for you versus others, but that becomes a prescription of changing and growth versus um, getting to the essence of the core of the message of non-duality. So um, non-duality is the base and the peak of those things of the experience, but the changing and the development of those experiences are dependent on your own individual reality, essentially. And so I can give you tips and tools and tricks. I can say, hey, you know, do this and that. But once I say that, then that becomes the thing of itself. So then that becomes the carrot of what non duality is representing. So if I were to say, you know, at minimum, you have to meditate a certain way for at minimum 1 hour per day, then that becomes the um, what non duality is framed as. That becomes the concrete reality of the message of non-duality, whereas non-duality is always, in a sense, absolutely in flux. And so that's where the freedom of the message of non-duality is in the change, is in the fact that what you see as real never stays the same. And so the moment that you point to yourself and say, this is me, this is who I am, that changes from one moment to the next. And maybe it's imperceptible depending on, are we talking 1 minute? Are we talking 1 second, 1 year, 50 years? That appearance will appear different depending on the how much time has passed. And so if you get down to minutia of time, then the change is so small that it's almost imperceptible, but it's all through time. It's always changing. And so the moment we point and say, that's concrete, that's who I am. I'm this way. That's my personality. That's my ego. That's my identity. I'm a person. I'm real. That's it right there. Once we make that statement, we're always speaking of the past. Time has already moved on. We're behind the eight ball. We're always talking about the past. We're always talking about what has already appeared and now is not true. Now is not what is. So we're pointing to that and saying that's what is, but we're already from um, the statement of that is in real time, if you will. But the interpretation of that is always in the past. And so kind of like, so that's in the example of time. In relation to the idea of space, when you think of space and time, um, think about how the idea of an event in the heavens, in the universe, of a star exploding, and it takes X number of light years to get to Earth for you to perceive that. So through the X number of light years for that information from that happening, that occurrence, travels through space to get to you to be able to see it in the stars, if you will. That takes time. So you're always seeing the past. And so you think about science, you're always, the further you look away, the stronger your telescope is, the more you're looking into the past. And so the further away it is, that happened so long ago. So your experience of that happening is way in the past, or that which you're perceiving happened way in the past. So it's no longer even real in the sense uh, of reality in the moment. So if you're over in that area through space at the same time that I'm on Earth experiencing it, your experience way far away would be way different than what I'm experiencing, because it's a perception difference. And so that's over light years away. So that's cognitively, intellectually, that's something that we can grasp. But when it's from the light hitting from my hand to my eye, it's so real time, it's so in the now, we don't interpret that as being in the past. But in a sense, it's the same in principle as seeing a star explode from light years away. It's still an interpretation of the past. So the light hits your eyes, goes through the process, you all of a sudden your brain functions, and your interpretation, your self, that which you perceive yourself to be, is commenting on it after after you're already aware of that reality. And so the conversation that you have about my hand and the light hitting my eye and the position of my hand, my thought process my thought process on that is always way slower. And it's the same way, like Paul Hederman says, the attachment to um, the self happens way before your commentary of it. So the attachment happens, and then you see it as a reality. So the attachment has already occurred. So it still takes a level of faith to see that the attachments happen, even though you can't prove that it's happened because your interpretation is always lagging. So practicality, how to experience non-duality. Non-duality is what you're experiencing in this very moment right now. That's non-duality. What does that change? Potentially nothing, or it could change everything. I don't know. So what can you do with that? You can say, well, that's stupid. You can stop listening and go about your day, or you can keep thinking about it or keep trying to experience it. You can keep seeking, because when you hear people say, and it's kind of like, a lot of, no horses were harmed in the creation of this live talk, but there's a lot of horses that are passed away that are continuing to be flogged, if you will, because we kind of keep saying things over and over again in different ways. And partially because that's how the mind works. It's always creating meaning. It's always trying to interpret. And so the release of that is always continuous, essentially, in a sense. It's always falling away. So even if in one moment you're like, I get it, this makes sense, I figured it out, I am now enlightened, the very next moment or 5 minutes down the road or the next day or the next week, you wake up, you're like, oh, I'm still the same person and I still think the same way, and I don't even know if non-duality is real, or what's the point of that? I don't get it. So that changes. So the fact that you can have an understanding, that understanding can be taken away as well. So practically, there's nothing you can do to experience non-duality, because it is what it is. But there are methods you can do to release yourself from your attachments, and maybe the message of non-duality, in some sense, would become more real. But nothing is required for that. Nothing is required. You could just have it spontaneously happen for you through no work whatsoever. And wouldn't that be great? But whether that happens or not is of no consequence. But from a practical standpoint, which, like I said before, I don't get into too much because that becomes the thing of non-duality in and of itself, is, I think Byron Katie's 4 questions, I mentioned that earlier. The work, she called it. So do the work, right? So it's a perfect way to describe it. Do the work in time, unravel your biases, however you want to describe it. But that I find to be, not that I do that in the sense of how she lays it out on a day-to-day basis. So it's kind of like I've used it in the past. So I see the value and the benefit, but I don't use it on a continual basis. But it's something I found that can be helpful to loosen you up a little bit as far as what you're attached to. But we're a little over an hour. So any other comments or questions here before we start to wrap it up? I'll wait. Guess there's no comments that I necessarily want to read right now, but if you go to some of my videos, you can see some of that and some of the replies I made. But I don't think I need to rehash any of that at this moment. I guess I'll just sit here patiently and drink my tea. Maybe stare deeply into the camera. I have noticed though, and like I don't watch a lot of non-duality videos, but I'll kind of scroll through a little bit. Um, and it's funny because I probably do the same thing, but a lot of times people, you know, whether it's sitting there and trying to meditate in the video or just taking a couple deep breath, there's this process of trying to um, relax into it and to get in a certain state of being in order to speak of this. And I think that's can be beneficial, even though it's, like I said, unnecessary. MMM says, I am greatly influenced by Upanishads on non-duality. Well, that's something I'm not as familiar on, but I think it's probably more eloquent than anything I say. I have a little knowledge of that and probably have read some of it, but um, I guess I can't really comment in depth on it. So it's, if that works for you, if you find value in that, I think more power to you. And the ancient teachings, whether it's the Upanishads or the Bible or the Quran or the Torah or whatever, it's there's a reason they've been around for so long, and there's a reason my YouTube channel still doesn't have 1,000 followers. What do you think? What do you think that the Upanishads has greatly influenced you on? Like, how would you describe that if you were to sum it up in a, short statement, if you will, out of curiosity? I still got a little tea remaining, so you got some time. The Triple M says, head and spine is the way towards non-duality as per Indian philosophy. So you're talking like the Kundalini and that sort of thing, I'm assuming, and the chakras or chakras. And that, yeah, that's, there was someone that had made a comment along those lines. I guess I can read quick. Let's see. Jay Truther says, hi, brother. I agree. Yes, I laugh out loud that non-duality is BS. But if you look into Kundalini Shakti, then your head will be blown off by God manifest in the physical. So there's that. I guess, I think it's, in a sense, I think a lot of Eastern philosophy really points to the trying to find. I mean, I think it's God is seen a little bit more impersonal, and like I said, I'm not an expert, but it's more of an impersonal God that is trying to be reached through some sort of practice or meditation or Kundalini work or that sort of thing. And so there's this attempt to experience this Godhead or this oneness through that process, because in lower states of consciousness or reality, uh, that is not seen to be the truth. And so we don't necessarily believe it as in down here in the mucky muck of life. So there's a practice to be able to once and for all see God for how God is and have that experience of enlightenment through this practice of energy work, essentially. Um, and so, in a sense, there's an absence. I think there's a difference between that and the idea of having faith. Um, because without this experience of this shift in awareness or this epiphany or enlightenment experience, then we can't, as lowly human beings, have that as a belief. We can't um, know it. And so, uh, through seeking, through a lack of faith, there's this attempt to be able to obtain that level of existence. So, therefore, we can now believe that it's real. And so, it's another, I guess, attempt in my mind to try and um, obtain wisdom through experience versus um, faith. So I can't just know it without, I have to have something to believe in. I have to, seeing is believing, experiencing is believing. If I believe something without experiencing it, then I am not, then I'm living out of accordance with truth, because I am saying things that I don't know for certain to be real. And so there's this real kind of almost a scientific approach to finding the truth of reality. So it's oftentimes very masculine or intellectual in its approach, I think. If you look at a lot of the gurus, I think, and like I said, I'm speaking on things that I'm not super versed on, so I apologize, but it seems like a lot of the gurus, at least historically, have been men. You can say that about other faiths too, but it's this way to try to achieve something, and you're being disingenuous if you have some sort of faith in that reality without having experienced it, without having your, um, without getting anointed or you know, through the experience of a Kundalini awakening, if you will. And yet again, it's the same story of trying to achieve a level of knowledge versus humbling yourself and realizing that um, you're not able to understand that. But I think when people have those types of experiences, it does help in um, pointing in the direction for others to see what you've seen. So I'm not negating the whole practice by any means. It can be helpful like anything. But non-duality is the reality or it's not, essentially, is what it comes down to. If you have to have some peak experience for non-duality to be real, then it's not non-duality. It's duality. It's separation prior to epiphany, prior to enlightenment. But the separation essentially is an illusion, And that's why people that talk about non-duality use terms like seeming or apparent, because there is still a nod, there's still a recognition of duality, but it's put in its place as not being absolute, as being relative, as seeming or appearing it to be so, but not to be true. And so that's how non-duality speakers, including myself, tend to try to mend the fence, build the bridge, if you will, in understanding um, this idea of um, real and unreal. Okay. Anything else? I don't know if I've done a good job of staring deeply into the camera. I've noticed a few times when I've watched myself talk, it can be distracting. So, I just, I guess I should try to attempt more to um, speak directly in the camera because it comes across a certain way. But it's kind of like, having a certain demeanor. It's irregardless or irrelevant to the subject matter. All right, we're 17 minutes past an hour. I've finished my tea, so I'm going to wrap it up here and say thank you for joining. Thank you for those that participated in the chat. And, whether I make another live talk or another video or not, I appreciate you joining. And if you made it through and you watched this entire video, more power to you. So thank you.